Today's video is a suggestion from one of my Canadian subscribers, and it's really a trip down memory lane for myself, and I'm sure some of you too. Today, we're going to talk about the most successful compilation record in Canadian history. It was so successful that chances are if you're a Canadian or you lived in the country between 1996 and 2009, then you probably took part in this cultural phenomenon. It was so popular that there was even a book written about it and its cultural significance in Canada. Today, let's talk about the rise and fall of Big Shiny Tunes. Rather than having MTV when we were kids in Canada, we had our own version called muchmusic. Much is still around today, but it's a sad shell of its former self, much like MTV. Starting in 1996, muchmusic would compile the year's biggest rock hits into a compilation album that would be released right before Christmas as the perfect stocking stuffer. It was called Big Shiny Tunes. It was usually labeled in the press as being an alternative album or full of alternative hits, but I think that's a mischaracterization. In reality, it was the year's most popular rock song spanning multiple genres from whatever was being played on radio and muchmusic at the time, whether it was nu metal, pop rock, punk, emo, post-hardcore, and so forth, with some Canadian bands thrown in as well. Personally, I first heard of Big Shiny Tunes when I was in grade 6, and that year Big Shiny Tunes 2 came out. I grew up in small town Alberta for most of my life, and in the lead up to pretty much every Christmas, my friends always talked about wanting the latest edition of Big Shiny Tunes. This is the commercial for the very first Big Shiny Tunes, which came out in 1996.
Big Shiny Tunes. muchmusic presents 18 bands in one delicious serving, including Fun Lovin' Criminals, Running Around, Robbing Banks, Porno for Pyros, No Doubts, Sloan, Poe, The Red Hot Chili Peppers, Moist, Better Than Ezra, Radiohead, plus 9 more. muchmusic's Big Shiny Tunes. 18 tracks, one low price. In stores now.
What made Big Shiny Tunes culturally Canadian was that it would have your usual hits from American and British artists, but it also featured Canadian talent as well, some established and some acts who weren't. To a lot of Canadians, it made it seem like their own homegrown artists were on the same playing field as the likes of Radiohead, Marilyn Manson, Bush, and No Doubt. Author Mark Teo would actually publish a book in 2018 that was titled Shine: How a muchmusic Compilation Came to Define Canadian Alternative Music and Sell a Zillion Copies. He would write, "For hundreds of thousands of people who own the album, it was a snapshot of us." The origin of Big Shiny Tunes has several beginnings based on what you read, but I'm assuming they all played some part in the compilation coming out. By 1993, compilation albums were really nothing new. I mean, they dated back to the 70s, and perhaps no company was better known for putting out these types of albums than a company called K-Tel, who put out genre-specific compilations. But soon enough, labels like Universal started asking themselves, why would we license our music to a third party when we could just cut out the middleman and do it ourselves? And that's exactly what Universal did. They put out a compilation of country songs from their own roster of artists in Canada in the mid-90s called Untamed and True. It was a surprise success, selling over 100,000 copies. Now, Canada by the mid-90s had produced some pretty successful alternative rock artists, some of whom had platinum albums during the decade, including Our Lady Peace, The Tragically Hip, Moist, The Tea Party, I Mother Earth, Big Wreck, and Matthew Goodband. Universal Music Canada would release a 90s compilation record during the middle of the decade called Absolute 90s. The album featured the likes of Weezer, White Zombie, Elastica, and a Canadian act named Sloan. While it was a modest success, Universal soon realized that there was a lot of other big acts that they couldn't include because they were on other record labels. So it only made sense for them to partner with other labels instead of having each label release their own compilations each year and compete with one another. I also want to point out that according to the Canadian band Sloan, they would tell Vice that some of Universal's own roster of artists declined to be included on the Absolute 90s record because they didn't want to be seen as sellouts. So in addition to teaming up with other major record labels including EMI and Warner Brothers, the labels needed to lend some legitimacy and credibility to the whole thing, and so they reached out to muchmusic. This led to the creation of Big Shiny Tunes, whose name was credited to an on-air promoter from the network who was loosely inspired by REM's song Shiny Happy People. With Much Music now behind it, Big Shiny Tunes would have a big leg up on the competition at the record store. Say you had money to spend, would you rather buy an album from a band whose single you heard on the radio and risk only liking one song and hating the rest of the record? Or you could use that money to get that one song and a bunch of other hits you already knew. It was a pretty easy choice for a lot of Canadian consumers. One thing that people may not know about the Big Shiny Tunes franchise was that every year a different record label released it and marketed it. But each label would still be represented on the track list. The track list would consist typically of 17 to 20 songs and would be decided by the reps for each of the labels and Much Music. It was important to the people of Much Music that Canadian artists be represented on each release, and Much Music would actually establish something in the 90s called Much Fact, which stood for Foundation to Assist Canadian Talent. It set aside a percentage of the channel's gross annual revenue to provide grants to Canadian recording artists to help them make their own music videos. This is how acts like Nickelback, Metric, and Alexis on Fire would actually get discovered by the channel. If Much Music gave these artists money, they'd be played on the network, and in turn, they'd be likely included in Big Shiny Tunes. Chris Murphy of the Canadian band Sloan would tell CBC how they were initially apprehensive about being included on the compilation, admitting, "At the time, we were like, I don't know, do we want to be on this? It doesn't sound cool," but it ended up selling tons of copies and made us look legitimately big when we weren't. It elevated us to a place where we were listed along with Beck and the Chili Peppers. In reality, we were a mom and pop act. Big Shiny Tunes would be instrumental in helping the careers of a lot of Canadian musicians, but it also went both ways. Some American acts who got limited play on radio and MTV also got a lot of exposure in Canada, with Poe being one of those examples. Big Shiny Tunes' impact wasn't just felt in record sales, but also in touring opportunities. David Usher from the Canadian band Moist would recall to the CBC, "We played with a bunch of big American acts back then, and Much Music had a lot of influence in making that happen." He would point to playing with groups like Metallica and Hole. At the end of the day, Big Shiny Tunes would transform small-time bands into household names. On top of the exposure and touring opportunities, Big Shiny Tunes also generated a good deal of money for Canadian artists, with Craig Halkett, the former head of programming for Much Music, telling Vice, "When you have a song on a million-selling record, you're making a lot of money, sometimes a lot more than they're making on their own record." Big Shiny Tunes 2 would be the biggest seller of the franchise, coming out in 1997, going diamond, selling about 1.2 million copies. It meant that nearly 1 in every 30 Canadians owned it, and here's an ad for Big Shiny Tunes 2 so you can get a sense of what was on the track list.
Observing, including Smash Mouth, Radiohead, Sugar Ray, Blur, Third Eye Blind, Marilyn Manson, Brand Band 3000, and more. Much Music's Big Shiny Tunes 2. 17 smoking tracks, one low price. In stores December 2nd.
To give you an idea of how culturally significant Big Shiny Tunes was in Canada, a spoof of the series called Big Bonky Tunes would be created from a company in Toronto that featured experimental artists covering the songs from the first 5 editions of the series with complete artistic freedom. There's even a Canadian cover band called Big Shiny Tunes that only plays songs that were featured on the compilation series. Over Big Shiny Tunes' 13-year run, it would sell a whopping 5 million copies across 17 releases. And while 5 million copies may not seem like a lot to our international subscribers, for a country whose population is around 30 million people, it's a pretty impressive feat. Sadly, Much Music went the way of MTV, focusing on pop and non-music programming by the new millennium, and rock music just wasn't as commercially viable by then, and the Much Dance series was selling a lot more copies. Also, technology was changing. People were consuming music differently, and record sales soon took a hit. Not to mention that with the advent of CD burning technology and file sharing, people could literally create their own Big Shiny Tune CDs for a fraction of the price, or make their own custom mixes. The band Nickelback would hold the honor of having the most songs appearing in the compilation, being featured on 7 releases. So let me know, guys, what was your memory of Big Shiny Tunes, and what release was your favorite in the comment section below. As always, if you guys have suggestions for future topics, let me know in the comment section below, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories.